Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this special episode of our Mayor's Updates. As I said in my weekly update the last time we spoke, we were going to have a special time just devoted to the upcoming FY'21 budget. So you all can see where your money is being put toward in the upcoming fiscal year. I proposed the new fiscal year 2021 budget to the City Council about 2 weeks ago, and they are currently in the process of meeting to review it before their approval. But where there's a lot of people who are asking questions on how does the pandemic affect the budget, what is being added, is anything being cut, we wanted to make sure we devoted some time specifically to go over what was in the document. And that's why we're here today. The budget pretty much, for all intents and purposes, is very similar to last year's budget. There isn't much change into it. And I can tell you one of the main reasons for that is when I started in the mayor's role, we were already into the new fiscal year and going off of what was called a continuing appropriation budget, or more commonly referred to as a 1/12 budget. We did that for the months of July and August, and there was one proposed to the City Council when I submitted the full budget for FY'21 as a contingency plan. If the council was unable to meet to vote to approve the budget by September 1st, they at least had a 1/12 budget to go off of as a contingency plan. However, it looks like the council is on track to pass the FY'21 budget by September 1st, so that may not be needed. I also want to make clear to you all that when we pass the full FY'21 budget, it isn't a double hit for you. It's not like we raised money to fund July on a 1/12 budget, raised new money again to fund money in August, and now we're starting new again. What happens is when the council passes the full FY'21 budget, all of the previous 1/12 budgets are absorbed by the full budget in the end. So everything we spent in July will automatically be deducted from the proposed full year budget that the council is currently voting on. And that's how that process works there. This is something very new to cities and towns across the state, that we are allowed to have these continuing appropriation budgets. However, this is something that regional school districts are actually allowed to do, and that's where the state got the model for this from. But again, we're hoping by September 1st, the full budget will be passed at that point. The total increase in the budget was just over $2.2 million from last year, and that equates to about $69.7 million. That's a lot of money, but it goes to a lot of different programs here in the city. That goes towards funding our schools, all of the offices that we have here in City Hall, everything you see our DPW doing in the streets, and so on from there. So there's a lot that this money goes into. And I want to make sure you knew what the highlights were as to why there was that increase this year. The main thing that can be seen throughout every department is that there was a 2% cost of living adjustment raise given to all of our employees. This is something that's very standard from year to year and normally goes along with the inflation line to make sure that our staff members are being paid an adequate amount. This is something I think we are probably in our 15th year of giving a 2% COLA adjustment from fiscal year to fiscal year. The only position that's seeing a higher than 2% raise in the budget document itself is our fire chief. And the reason for this is a lot of people don't realize that state law actually dictates when a police officer or a firefighter are required to retire. And our fire chief here, Richard Aries, is reaching that retirement age in the month of September. So in order to make sure when we go out and advertise for the fire chief position next month, that the position has a attractable salary so we get good candidates, we bump that up a little bit over the 2% there to make sure that that was at a competitive rate for when we go advertise for that position. So that's really the main salary difference in the budget document itself. All other salaries are actually set by ordinance in front of the City Council, and that's something that we'll be proposing to them within the next month. We do have a new position, though, that's in the budget that's being added to our health department, and it's being titled a Substance Abuse Prevention Coordinator. This is something that I campaigned on during the campaign for mayor, and I'm glad to see it's put in the budget document now. It is going to be working with our health officials and our nonprofit sectors to make sure that we continue to increase our prevention efforts to make sure we combat the opioid epidemic here in the city and are doing our part to help our community members who are in need of those extra services. On top of that work, it actually worked out pretty well because the Gardner Community Action Team reached out to my office to let us know that they were at risk of losing some of the funding that funds their personnel for GCAT. Due to the national grant having some funding constraints with how many years we've applied for the grant, and then the current pandemic playing a part in that as well. So this new position that's being created in the health department would not only take on some work in substance abuse prevention, but would also then take on GCAT as a sub-department of our public health department that we have here in City Hall. In doing so, we can make sure that we continue to do the excellent work that GCAT is doing in our community in terms of working with our schools, community outreach, organizing events like the National Night Out that we see every year to raise awareness for the dangers of substance abuse, and making that city run so that we have a greater control and communication over that work that's being done there that's very vital and important to our community there. So I'm very excited to see that we were able to include that new position in the FY'21 budget. A couple other areas in which we saw some changes from last year is in our solid waste accounts. This is an enterprise account, and it's our trash removal account. This is something that we don't put any tax dollars for. That's what an enterprise account means. It means everything that we collect in fees goes to paying the entirety of that budget, and anything that's left over after the fiscal year is done, if there's money left in the budget, that goes back into that account in the next year. It's like a revolving account, but it's for a specific service, and that's why it's called an enterprise account. The reason why we're seeing substantial increases in the line items within that budget this year is because during the period where the city didn't have an elected mayor and we're operating off of an acting mayor, our contract with Waste Management expired. Now, this is a contract that we normally have for the period of 5 years, so we're able to get a good rate on that contract because we can forecast and say we'll be with this company for the 5-year span of the contract. However, an acting mayor did not have the authority to sign a contract longer than a year. So in order to make sure our trash collection service was able to still run, the acting mayor at the time had to sign a 1-year contract to make sure that those services continued, but because it was only a 1-year contract, our prices increased substantially. My office is already working with Director Saunders from the Board of Health to make sure that we can get a better deal off of a longer term contract when this 1-year contract expires next year, and see if we can recuperate some of that extra funding that we're taking a hit for this year. But again, that doesn't equate to an increase in taxes or an increase in change in the services that you are receiving if you have our trash collection services. That's just what we have on the back end on the enterprise account there. So you shouldn't see too much of a hit, if anything, there on top of what you're already currently paying for your trash rate and the rates that the City Council has set a couple months ago. And another thing that I'm very, very proud to see that we were able to do in this budget is back on May 19th, the school committee had their public hearing and special meeting to approve the school committee's budget request for the upcoming fiscal year. At that meeting, Dr. Pellegrino said that the city was only committed to fund schools $43,000 over net school spending during the coming fiscal year, just because of the current pandemic and where we were unsure with our revenue projections at that time. Well, after taking office and working with our finance team and Dr. Pellegrino, I'm happy to say that we are funding our schools about $1 million over net school spending from that $43,000 that we were hearing back in May. When I was sworn into office in my inaugural address, one of the things I said was that we need to treat our schools for what they are. They're a way in which we make a permanent impact on the daily lives of our next generation every day that they step foot in their classrooms, or I guess in this upcoming year, open their Chromebooks to virtually learn until we're able to get back into the classroom. But we need to treat it for what it is, and it's how we're training our students for their futures. So I was very happy to see that we were able to get that number back up to $1 million, which is where we have been over the course of the past 5 years. In our 5th year that we've ever been able to go over net school spending. Prior to 2015, we were only able to fund schools at the minimum. So to see just that growth where we are over the past 5 years is phenomenal. However, the current COVID-19 pandemic does play a part in our budget projections on our revenue side. Now, while there's not much listed in the budget document in terms of our revenue projections this year, because we had to get something done quick enough to get to the council to avoid going into a 1/12 budget for September, I'm hoping next year we can add a little bit more information into the budget document so that you all understand where your tax dollars are going. But the main hit that the pandemic is actually going to potentially bring to the city is that the bulk of our local aid that we receive from the state is paid for out of lottery revenue. A portion of every scratch ticket that's sold or Keno game that's played, and all of the portions that don't go towards the winnings that are received in those games are given to cities and towns across the state through a formula that was made at the state level based on population. Since lottery games have been down since the pandemic started and restaurants have been closed and people are trying to pinch their pennies a little more, we're unsure where state and local aid is going to go once the state fully passes their budget in November. Normally the state budget is passed by now and we have a better idea of where we're going, but even with the state operating in a 1/12 budget for the next couple months, a lot of that's just up in the air. So what we did was my office and our auditing office went to 2007 and 2006, and we saw what our revenue was there, and we saw what our revenue was in 2008, 2009, 2010 at the height of the recession, and looked at what the average percentage was for the reduction in revenue we received at that time. And it was about 8%. So then we took last year's revenue and reduced it by 8% in this year's budget. And that's how we made sure that we had a conservative enough approach to make sure that we didn't have any financial surprises mid-year. So we took recession levels in cuts to our revenues, but we were still able to fund all of those services adequately that I mentioned to you earlier there. A lot of the places we are expecting to see a little bit of a financial hit are local aid, as I said, motor vehicle excise taxes, just because while there were some great deals out there during the height of the pandemic for people to buy new cars, a lot of people just weren't out buying cars because they were either working from home or trying to find new ways to save their funding that they had at their homes. And other collections were expected to be in a little slower due to the pandemic. However, we are still in a very, very healthy financial state. I'm excited to see what projects and programs and initiatives we're able to do if the new items in the budget are approved by the council, particularly with our substance abuse coordinator and funding our schools back up to where they should be at about $1 million over net school spending. And if you have any questions on any of the information that's in the budget document that'll be linked in the description of this video, or in terms of what the long-term impacts are of the financials that are in the budget, feel free to call my office at any time, 978-630-1490, and someone from my office or myself in person will be happy to talk to you at any time. But until our next weekly update, please take care of yourselves and others, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you very much.